we've pretty much got the whole picture now. Kinda. Let's get started.
Another race for the world's greatest driver, Juan Manuel Fangio.
Former world champion Jim Clark leapt into the lead. That's Clark's Lotus going like a bomb.
And James Hunt is the world champion by just one single point.
By being a racing driver, you are under risk all the time. And if you no longer go for a gap that exists, you're no longer a racing driver.
And that is Michael Schumacher ahead, the world champion.
To become a four-time world champion, Sebastian Vettel, Lewis Hamilton, champion of the world.
That's for all the kids out there who dream the impossible.
Max Verstappen, for the first time ever, is champion of the world.
Oh my God! Max Verstappen, you are the world champion! The world champion!
Hello and welcome to episode 37 of F1 in Review, the episode in the hour where we discuss the remaining parts of the Mexican Grand Prix and look forward to the Brazilian Grand Prix, which is coming up this weekend. I'm Tom Clabon, and as ever, I'm joined by Tristan Fancourt and Angus Gallager. A reminder that you can follow myself and Tristan individually on Twitter, as well as the F1 in Review account, where these episodes, once they've gone out, go out on that Twitter page on our profile. So do follow us to keep up to date with episodes present and past, and the ones to come as well if you give us a follow more after. So carrying on from the last parts of the Mexican Grand Prix, Pierre Gasly, quite a decent race from him, qualified in P14, rose to P11 just outside of the points, but the more talkative issue, I suppose, regarding the Frenchman is now the fact that he's got 10 points on his F1 licence after the stewards deemed he'd forced Lance Stroll off the track and also slapped him with a 5-second time penalty. He is now 2 points away from 12. You think, well, 12, that's a random number, surely. No. But no, that is actually the total needed to be rewarded with a race ban. And this is in place until May, so this could affect him for Alpine in terms of the first few months of next season. Now, he's been critical of the FIA in the past after he was penalised for speeding under the red flag conditions of the Japanese Grand Prix, lest we forget, and for leaving too big a gap behind the safety car in Austin in the USA Grand Prix. In your view, could he get banned? Is there a serious threat to the fact that Alpine could be with one driver without their normal pairing come one race next season?
Well, it was awfully lucky that Pierre Gasly and others, Daniel Ricciardo, I'm looking at you, decided to have some interesting moments within the Mexican Grand Prix, because feel for us, dear listener, although we had to watch the boring race, we've then got to make content from it. And and to be honest, this is it. This is the content from the Mexican Grand Prix, I think, in its culmination, the final symphony. If you like, whether or not you should have gone away with it, Pierre Gasly, I'm not totally sure. Look, I think he could definitely get a race ban next year. He is now perilously close, as you outlined in the beginning there, Tom. And Pierre Gasly has not had a particularly clean season this year, it's safe to say. And look, everyone's gonna make mistakes. And I would say that in penalty points, you kind of get two types of penalty points. Where you get the I'm going to dive bomb and try to take a place that I can't really take, and you get that penalty. And then you get the other type of penalty, like, maybe you did something a bit silly, but it ended up being much worse than you perhaps thought. You locked up your brakes, and that's why you ended up hitting them. It wasn't because you were particularly malicious. It's just because, there was a sort of a more of a dominant effect, if you'd like, where we might say, well, yeah, the end result was just the same, but the circumstances around it weren't so good. And as much as many drivers will avoid the malicious, I'm going to, basically try and punt you off the road and get that place whether or not you like it or not sort of penalty. Many of them will get the, I accidentally locked up and sort of hit other people sort of penalties. Think about Bottas in the 2021 season when he decided to go bowling at Hungary in the rain when he took out what seemed like half the pack. Because he kind of made a mistake. And I don't see Pierre Gasly getting to May next year without making some sort of mistake that will end up with a penalty of some sort. And so I could definitely see him having a race ban. And I think it would be unfortunate. But to be honest, you have to lie in the bed that you make, for want of a better phrase. Pierre Gasly has set himself up to be at this perilous position, has he not? And if we're going to be honest, it's a very long season next year, and there are going to be many moments in that brand new Alpine car that he's going to be in which he's going to have to take risky decisions. Now, if you're Pierre Gasly, are you going to look at the amount of penalty points that you have and say, no, I'm not going to take risks? No, of course you're not, because at the end of the day, high risk, high reward. And so I reckon, I'm just going to put this out there and I want to hear your thoughts. I reckon April. I reckon late April, he's going to get a race ban.
Well, here's the thing. He has to get through 5 races at least next season without picking up any more points, and the remaining 2 races this season, because he doesn't drop any more penalty points until May. For those unsure, you basically get penalty points and they last you a whole year. They stay on your license a whole year, and then you drop them when it comes to exactly 12 months later. So he has to survive. Maybe others have to survive when they're around him based on the penalty points, but he has to get to next April at least, and possibly further into May. So 5, 6, 7 races without picking up any penalty points. And it's weird because the things he's picking up penalty points for are things which obviously they occur and they happen. And now I feel like the penalty point system, like you said, Tristan, you get ones where they are race incidents, like dive bombs or moves gone wrong. And there are others which are sort of not smaller offences, but ones like speeding under yellow flags. Ironically, he unfortunately got penalty points in Japan when he was going too fast under the red flag, which then had the tractor out on track, which he drove perilously close to. Not his own, and that wasn't his own fault at all. But also, it's a strange situation because whilst obviously he's racking up these points, if you said to me about Pierre Gasly's driving this year, I wouldn't necessarily associate him with being necessarily reckless or dangerous or like over the edge. And yeah, he's racking up points like there's no tomorrow. He's literally just like adding. It seems like the last few races he's added 1 or 2 to his tally each time, and it's very odd to think that because you wouldn't necessarily consider him a dirty driver or one who would pick up these penalty points. But here we are in this situation. It also raises a debate which has happened before about the whole penalty point system in the first place. And some drivers in the past have voiced their thoughts, saying they think it's a bit like the system's not completely fair, that it's not completely rounded or consistent. I think probably because I could be wrong on this, but I'm pretty sure it was introduced first in junior formulae, so in Formula 2 and Formula 3, so that drivers who might genuinely be a danger to others would pick up points and then could sit on the sidelines for a race. And that's been applied in Formula 2 possibly this year or last year, with drivers picking up points for similar reasons, such as yellow flag, speeding, safety car infringements, incidents, etc., etc. And they brought it up to Formula 1, I suppose, to make sure that, I guess in the main thing, rookie drivers were conducting themselves well and not being overzealous and not stepping over the line. But now you've got a situation where a driver who hasn't particularly gone over the line this year, but has just had a couple of minor infringements with yellow flags and track limits, and has also been arguably shafted with the penalty points he got from the tractor incident or the almost tractor incident in Japan. And you now got a system where a driver could be punished for being a little bit careless instead of being properly reckless. So it raises an interesting debate about how we've had talk in the last few weeks about whether the super license criteria are fair, considering Colton Herta, an IndyCar race winner, couldn't make it into Formula 1. There's now a debate about whether the penalty point system is too fair. And it does come across as a bit harsh in some aspects. I can see the merits of it. But yeah, I'd be interested to see what you guys think as well about what you whether the system is. Because realistically, Pierre Gasly just got 1 or 2 points for going off doing an overtake on track limits. Now, surely every driver should get one of those, and there should be more consistency. But yeah, it's an interesting one to think about.
Yeah, it's crazy to think, isn't it? That Pierre Gasly, a very experienced driver in the F1 paddock, could be the first in quite a while from my memory. I can't really remember any driver getting banned owing to accumulation of licence points being banned from a race. Really. I remember one or two from that huge crash in Belgium, I believe, around the 2010s, where there was Hamilton and Grosjean involved. That resulted in a ban, but that was owing to the nature of the incident rather than an accumulation. But yeah, Gasly could be banned, which is quite remarkable. And if you're looking at Alpine so far this season, maybe this won't translate to next, but they do have a record of being slightly unreliable when it comes to their cars and not finishing races. We've seen this, for example, with Alonso, for example, more than Ocon, but Ocon previously when he was racing with Ricciardo. So imagine you've got the reliability issues of a previous Alpine constructor coupled with an enforced ban of one of your drivers, and there is a real concern there. And as you say, looking at the calendar for next year, he's got to survive, be a very, very good driver until sort of Baku onwards. Baku is April 30th, and then May 7th is Miami. So got to survive 5 races in addition really to the 2 that are to come in terms of Brazil and Abu Dhabi. So a very sort of difficult tightrope for him to walk there in that regard. And you would have to say, in terms of basic odds and in terms of how in some instances the FIA can be quite hawkish with some drivers versus others. For example, when it comes to Gasly, I think that yes, it was forcing another driver off a track. He should have been penalised, but you've seen other drivers get away with far more, really, not be sanctioned or ridiculed by the FIA in terms of what they get from them post-race, during race, or whenever, really. So I think that raises a consistency question about what the FIA deem as being forced off a track. Does it just mean literally crossing the line, or does it mean forcing the driver off a track into a position of jeopardy, or a situation where they could be in danger? So questions there, really, but yeah, I'm quite surprised really that Gasly is this close, and it does raise, you say there, Angus, some legitimate questions regarding, I suppose, the licence points that are given out by the FIA. Could a driver really be, I suppose, banned for what ultimately is a subjective judgment on many different occasions? Because yes, we can go and say that was a penalty, that wasn't a penalty, but we're in a situation again where it's not a black or white situation by which a driver's getting banned. It's somebody saying, I think this is a penalty, I think this is not. And we've got to remember those making the decision at the FIA. Yes, there have been 2 at the helm versus 1 previously, but there's not a collective judgment. So I think it would be harsh, but it remains to be seen what the final, I suppose, incident is where Gasly does get that ban or doesn't, really. But unprecedented times is the way I describe it more than anything else.
It's funny that you raise the point that maybe we're being too harsh on Gasly, and that it's quite an extreme measure for a series of minor offences, because I think this is a view that's shared amongst much of the F1 fandom and the race following population. And I do kind of disagree with it, and I will explain why in just a moment. But in answer to the question of when the last race ban was, this system was introduced in 2014, I think, and so we haven't had very much time with it, and we haven't really had one yet. It's not the last race ban. The last race ban that I can remember is Romain Grosjean in 2012, when he got banned from the Italian Grand Prix. And that, as you say, that was, I think, you mentioned this one, it was because of the almighty crash that had occurred. Yeah. And throughout the season as well, Grosjean had a whole number of both minor and quite serious problems. And so they went, yep, in 2014, I think it was 2014. I'm sure you'll correct me, listeners, if I'm wrong about this. They went, yeah, okay, we've got to have a system to penalise the drivers if they are consistently bad or consistently break the rules. And this is the thing about the point system. It doesn't matter whether or not you're given 1 point or 6 points. At the end of the day, if you do enough of of breaking the rules, you should get a race ban eventually. And if you look at what Gasly's penalty points have been given to him for, then it kind of all makes a sense. It all kicked off in Spa when he collided with Lance Stroll, which gave him 2 points. He then collided at Sebastian Vettel in Austria for 2 points. He kept leaving the track for 1 point. If he only got that 1 point, then fair enough, he's not going to get a race ban. But when you combine it with colliding with other people, that's suddenly you're at 5 points. Japan speeding under the red flag conditions. Doesn't matter the circumstances there. He was failing to be within more than 10 cars lengths behind the safety car, 2 points. That's the only one I think is a little bit too harsh, actually. Everyone drops behind the safety car more than 10 car lengths often, but they're not very consistent with that one. So perhaps maybe we let them off there. But Mexico leaving the track and gaining an advantage, 1 point. What a stupid mistake! Why didn't the team tell him? Get back on the, give that place back to Lance Stroll. Because at the end of the day, did he leave the track and did he get an advantage? Yes, he did. Right, penalty point. So even if, we're very lenient and we say, fine, the safety car one was a bit harsh, 1 point, then he's actually still 2 points away. Whether or not we like Pierre Gasly or not, he has consistently broken the rules. And yes, there is an argument that, well, they should be applied, more consistently. And I totally agree. We had many drivers across the season leaving the track and not getting disadvantaged by it. And in the US, I think Max Verstappen's fastest lap, or one of his fastest laps, was off the track. But for some reason, they didn't pick up on it because it's a human checking the white line, not a computer or a camera, which is how they do it in NASCAR and in other motorsports as well. They do it automatically, and it should be automatic, so we don't have this. But that just because something isn't being applied consistently doesn't mean it's wrong to be applied. And so the fact is, these things have been applied to Gasly, and therefore he is now in the situation where he is only a couple of points now away from a race ban, but he has had a season in which he has done some pretty, silly things, leaving the track, gaining an advantage, and also colliding with people like Lance Stroll and Sebastian Vettel. Apparently, Pierre Gasly just really hates Aston Martin.
See, in my view, when it comes to an accumulation of smaller points resulting in the Magic 12, if you will, I'd much rather there be an enforced pit lane start, because in my mind, that then evens out the consistency questions we have regarding the FA, because if you then have a situation where someone goes, hey, well, no, that's clearly 12 points, because we remember in Grand Prix X, Y, and Z, he did this, and go, oh, well, no, actually, compared to what so-and-so did at that Grand Prix as well, that shouldn't have been a points deduction or indeed a points adding on to the licence for that driver. So in that regard, an enforced pit lane start for that driver would be the best way to sort of sanction them, ultimately finish off their race unless you're a Red Bull or maybe a Ferrari car this season. Don't know what next year's will be like, but pretty much a pit lane start for any driver at a majority of tracks is, in my mind, pretty much close to, if not a DNF, a 0 points race. But what do you guys think? Would that be a harsh enough sanction? Is that too lenient when it comes to someone like Pierre Gasly and what he's done this season?
I still think that it's a bit harsh, simply because I think you have to look at the crime, and his crime is, it's not that he's a dangerous driver. Like Grosjean wasn't dangerous, he was just reckless, and he had lots of first lap incidents regularly when he was in a confined wheel to wheel combat. But Gasly's just done a few little misdemeanors which are just piled up, and yes, you could say he's doing little things, but again, it's like the track limits thing, the safety car gap that he did. There's little things. It's not like he's repeating the same mistake loads and loads. He's just doing lots of little things. So I still think a pit lane start would be harsh, I think. But I mean, it's one of those where the debate will rage on, I'm sure, and there'll be people will disagree in terms of what's the best way to get the most out of the system. But I still think that he's being a bit hard done by overall, and it'd be the same for any driver. I guarantee you, and I promise, hand on heart, even if Lance Stroll was doing this, or Nicholas Latifi, I promise, I would still be saying, oh, it's a bit harsh. So I think that it's not the best system, personally.
Without wanting to put you on the spot there, Angus, what would you like instead of a race ban or a pit lane start?
I mean, another step would be fines, perhaps. And, I don't know, probably fines would be the best one. A different penalty point system where there's a ranking of the points you get for certain things. At the moment, it seems like it just seems to me like it's only 2 or 1 points you get for an instant, and it's pretty random how many points you get for each one. It's not like, oh, this is a track limit, so we're going to give you 1, and then this is a serious instance, so we're going to give you 3 points. It's just, right, that will give you 2, that 1. There doesn't seem to be any clear outline of how it's delegated or how it's given out. So either fines or just a clearer penalty point system, realistically, would be what comes to mind.
Well, what I'd say, actually, is if we had a system where the FIA... It sounds to me, Tom, like you want a system where the FIA can choose the end penalty. Is that it? Is that, you're saying, well, if you get to 12, the FIA can choose, let's say, forced pit lane start, back of the grid, or a race ban if you manage to get to that magic threshold by doing, say, quite a lot of major offences.
I think it depends on the nature of the crime, if you will, because if it's, let's say, hypothetically, you accumulate all your points via exceeding track limits, then that, in my mind, is not worthy of a race ban. That's worthy of a pit lane start, where it's highly unlikely you'll get points, very unlikely, but there is still a chance, a very small chance. But a race ban for something like that, where we've seen track limits be such a contentious issue where other drivers, i.e. I don't want to say those at the top, but yeah, those at the top have seemingly got away with it more than drivers outside of the points, that quashes the sort of consistency, biased, the FIA have an agenda type argument I hear, because then someone is penalised, but not the ultimate penalisation of being, oh, well, you're not in the car.
The only thing is, often we say that we want a system where you know exactly what the punishment's going to be, and for lack of consistency in other areas, at least everyone goes into the season knowing exactly what happens when you get to 12 penalty points. It isn't a mystery, and it's one of the very few things in F1 where we know the exact penalty. Often, if someone has a crash, we wait to find out whether or not it's a 5 seconds, whether or not it's a 10 seconds. Is it going to be a stop-go? Is it going to be a drive-through penalty? And then it's announced, and everyone goes, "Oh, how could you set a new precedence when we had this previous precedence?" And the stewards this time are being biased because it's Lewis Hamilton or whatever. I would like to point out that for all of that, we know exactly what happens when we get to 12 points. No matter what you've done, how you've got there, you've reached a threshold and you will get a race ban. That's what happens. And so, whether or not you are Lance Stroll, whether or not you're Pierre Gasly, whether or not you're Lewis Hamilton, Max Verstappen, or, Nico Hulkenberg, whoever is in F1 at any time knows exactly what punishment they'll get if they get to 12 penalty points. And 12 points, on their license. So, I would consider for a moment that perhaps, although it's not the best system, it is a system which we can trust because we know exactly what the penalty will be at the end of it. And at the end of the day, all the drivers have signed up to this at the beginning of the season. They know what the contract states.
And going on to the other business for the Mexican Grand Prix, Daniel Ricciardo, quite a good race, really. I can't believe I'm saying this after the misdemeanors so far of this season, but qualified in P11 up to P7. Yes, there was that rather stupid move on lap 51, I believe, versus Tsunoda, got himself a 10-second penalty there. But super moves versus Alonso, Ocon, Bottas, and he's really making the car sing there, that McLaren, and that's DNF from Alonso, that 2 points finish in terms of both drivers of McLaren finishing in the points, means that now McLaren are 7 points behind Alpine in the battle for 4th place. They laughed at me, they're not laughing now. What do you make about Daniel Ricciardo and his race there in Mexico then? A rather, I'd say, rolling back the years, would we say, of his ability in a car to make it sing and get some decent points.
Hang on, did you just say the words Daniel Ricciardo and good race in the same sentence? What?
That's correct, my boy.
No, but seriously, he's yeah, I know, crazy. But no, he had an absolute stormer, which is ironic because I can't lie, I wasn't watching the race at the time. I was busy through other means, but I was just checking the live timing, the live text updates on the Formula One app, and it was said, and I got to a bit where it said basically Daniel Ricciardo punts into Yuki Tsunoda. And I thought, oh, Daniel, once again, having a letdown, just another race which is just going absolutely down the drain. Once again, I can't believe he's done it. Will this guy ever recover? And literally, he did recover. He's literally came back, absolute stormer, piled through the field. Put in perspective, admittedly, he did put on fresh tyres after the pit stop he had. I think in the end he got a bit lucky. It coincided well if he had any damage from the collision with Tsunoda, because he actually ended up launching Tsunoda's car. Launching is an exaggeration, but he bumped Tsunoda's car up off the ground, causing himself a little bit of damage. And it timed well with him needing to make his final pit stop, and he went on a charge and he overtook loads of people. He got past Alonso by the time Alonso's engine blew up. He got past Bottas, Norris and Ocon. And then he also managed to build up, because he got a 10-second penalty as a result of the collision. And he managed to build up enough of a gap before he could be passed on the timings at the end of the race. What is this? Where has this Daniel Ricciardo been, guys? Where has he been? He just, even if it takes a set of circumstances where he has to crash into somebody, regret his mistake, and then go on a stormer afterwards, even if it's taken that to produce his best performance of the year, then still, where has he been? Really, really odd how that ended up being the set of events that led to him getting such a good points finish. But yeah, he's a brilliant little, shot in the arm for McLaren, definitely. In their battle with Alpine, which somehow they are still in, despite realistically Alpine having a pace advantage for most of the season. Lando Norris has been taunting Alpine in various quotes I've seen in articles the last few weeks, saying, I don't know how we're so close to them because they're so much faster than us. But imagine where they would be if Ricciardo had scored more points. That's another debate for another time, of course. But on the subject of this race, he did have an absolute stormer. He came through, finishing 7th, did the most he could because the top 3 teams filled the 6 places above him, so best of the rest effectively, and yeah, really helping McLaren's cause in a Constructors' Championship battle which is still alive, going to the final 2 races, and I can't really explain how he did so well, because he just, something came within him and he had a penalty and he managed to negate that penalty by being far enough ahead, and he just absolutely smashed it. And I can't believe I'm uttering those words about him in this year of Formula 1, but there we go. Strange things can happen sometimes. But fair play to him, and let's see if it gives him a little lease of life going into the final 2 races. And then after that, he's not here 2023, and then all this talk of him, he's talking about getting a seat for 2024 at a nice project at a bigger team. Again, that's a whole other debate for another time, whether he'd be brought back in having had the 2 years that he's had. But yeah, it's hopefully he can, for his sake at least, carry on this good momentum that he's built up in Mexico, carry it on to the last 2 races.
Yeah, it was an odd race really for Ricciardo, wasn't it? Because on one hand we had that strange situation where he got into a little fight and as you say, got the 10-second penalty. And I guess this ties in a little bit, doesn't it, to whether or not you should be able to get a 10-second penalty and then also have success. I don't know whether or not you have any thoughts of that in a moment. Because poor Yuki Tsunoda, had a race ruined. I find it a bit odd that, we're celebrating the success of Ricciardo whilst commiserating Yuki, because it really wasn't his fault that Daniel went for a gap that he really couldn't fit into, no matter what the drive was like afterwards. I think he was lucky, to be honest. But let's talk about, what he did, really, which was he kind of did the thing that George Russell wanted to do. And he stayed on his medium tyres for absolutely ages and then jumped on a pair of softs to bring it home at the end. And that's really what Daniel's secret was, I think, at the Mexican Grand Prix. Effectively, tyre degradation was incredibly low. Much lower than any of us suspected. And Daniel clearly had enough tyres left on those mediums that he could extend it, and then jump onto the soft. So when everyone else went onto the hard tyres, Daniel was on 2 compounds softer on a low degradation track, which gave him such an almighty advantage. In terms of the race time, it sort of predicted that he was 30 to 40 seconds quicker, which is a huge amount. That's how he was able to negate the 10-second penalty he was given. So I can only imagine what maybe Mercedes would have been able to do if they actually decided to split that strategy, because Ricciardo's living proof that it was very good. So does this mean therefore that Ricciardo's back? I'm not sure. It was a good race from him, no doubt, because they got the strategy right. He was able to really demonstrate what he could do again. But we shouldn't let it cloud the fact that Ricciardo's had a pretty poor season as it stands, and he will sadly not be driving next year. But as a fan of McLaren, as a fan of Ricciardo, it was lovely to see him happy and smiling, taking those chances and taking so many overtakes, and eventually, as I say, being more than 10 seconds ahead. So he managed to retain his position, especially when Norris isn't doing so well in the race. As you say, I can only imagine now what it would be like if Ricciardo was like this all season. And I think that's what makes it so difficult, because I'm a big McLaren fan. I love the team and I really want them to do well. And this is why it's so bittersweet, this sort of moment of magic, because I just can't help but thinking, like, where the hell was this Daniel Ricciardo? Why on earth did he wait till 3 races to the end? And if he didn't wait and it was just luck, well then that's Daniel Ricciardo's current driver prowess. He's all right until he gets lucky, and then he does really well. And perhaps we were so enamored by the clutch 1-2 win last year at Monza that we actually overlooked the fact that perhaps it was just lucky. And I think that's what makes it really frustrating, because if it wasn't luck, then it's disappointing, because Ricciardo could have done so much better, maybe stayed in the sport and brought McLaren, some even more glory. And if it was luck and he's just, not that good anymore, then this was a wonderful moment, but it cannot reflect his season as a whole.
Yeah, I think the win at Monza, the 1-2 there, definitely did paper over some cracks when it comes to Daniel Ricciardo's time at McLaren, and also McLaren's last few seasons, really, because he was brought in with such optimism about what he and Norris could do, but it's not really transpired in any fashion or another aside from 1 or 2 races. But credit where it's due, that was a decent race from him, a scruffy race nonetheless, but he was able to get himself some points there. And it seems that looking at these sort of last few races, it's very highs or lows for Daniel Ricciardo. A P5 finish in Singapore, for example, and then down out of the points in Japan and the US, for example. And I'm seeing odd parallels between himself and Sebastian Vettel in terms of this season, where we probably expected a bit more. We're not getting that, but they're peaking at the sort of latter end of this season, and that sort of transpires in many ways in the fact that Vettel is P11 in the Drivers' Championship, and then Ricciardo is P12. But then again, looking at the car they were driving in, there's no question that Ricciardo should be a lot higher than P12, not below in Aston Martin, not below the Alfa Romeo of Bottas, for example, and should be there at least with the Alpine cars and near his teammate. But that's just not happened this season, last season, or any season really. And I think his idea, his ambition that he's going to somehow return like a white knight in 2024 and say, don't worry lads, I'm here to save the day, bring me back on a decent sort of wage and I'll do the job, is slowly fading really, because he's not been at the races for this season, last season. He'll be out of Formula 1 for next season, so that's 3 years of being bad in Formula 1 or out of Formula 1. And I fail to see how there's too many teams in Formula 1 in terms of the constructors of a decent calibre in terms of midfield to upper midfield, so we're going to go, let's take a chance on him. Let's have a go with Daniel Ricciardo, not only because of his poor record more recently, but also the fact that he's 33 at the moment, 34 going on 35 by the time he returns in 24. And yes, we're going to get onto some news about a 35-year-old who is going to perhaps be making a return to Formula 1, but I think really in terms of the roles he's being offered now with Mercedes and Red Bull battling out for him to be their reserve driver, that's probably the best it's going to be for him now and moving forwards. And on that point, do you think that's a good move for him? Should he stay as a reserve driver in Formula 1? Should he return to his old team or go over to what is, I suppose, his former employer's arch nemesis? What do you make of the fact that Ricciardo could stay in and perhaps be, I suppose, the Hulkenberg, if you will, of Mercedes or Red Bull come next season if one of their drivers falls ill or something happens there?
Honorary Hulkenberg, eh? That's a badge that we, that's unexpected, isn't it? Really, I to be honest, I think it's a good place for him, and it gives him an opportunity to perhaps stay around the sport a little bit longer and then come back in. That'd be nice. But again, I think he's going to struggle a little bit, simply because you're going to pick a driver on their merits, or you're supposed to anyway, and this season will not be forgotten. Especially when the options are Daniel Ricciardo, not currently with a drive, and his last season was, all right, versus up-and-coming talent, new prospects, or nabbing a really good driver from another team. They're your kind of three options. Nabbing a driver, bringing back a reserve, or up-and-coming talent. Now, if you put those in a line, I would argue that Daniel Ricciardo doesn't stand a very particularly great chance at this precise time, unless, let's say, he comes in as a reserve and absolutely does a knockout race, and everyone sort of forgets the season and comes back to him and goes, "Yep, no, we were wrong. This is fantastic. You obviously have, you can drive the new cars however they're designed," and then maybe he gets back in the sport. But I think at the moment the best place for him is perhaps as a reserve driver. And, there's so many other things he can do. I could see Daniel, helping with things like the presenting, having he's funny, he's likable, he's charming, he's a good speaker. And there's no shame in having a great run in Formula 1 and then sticking around the paddock to create impact in new and other ways. I mean, the fans really like him. So, he could still work with F1 or in F1 as, pundit, commentator, whatever. Jenson Button's been doing it recently on the Sky team. And to be honest, he's actually been brilliant. I've really, really enjoyed Jenson Button. He provided incredible insight at Japan. In fact, he made the Sky's coverage at Japan worth listening to, because he was able to dissect it quite nicely. And I think Ricciardo could perhaps, not maybe in the same way that Jenson Button can do, because he has his own approach, but, that's not to say that Ricciardo can also be a presenter, a pundit, or something. I don't think he's going to leave the sport. Let's just say that.
What should Ricciardo do next? I think that, there's been talk of he's a very popular man in America. He's got a good American audience. That's obviously been expanded via the Drive to Survive avenue. If I was him, I'd say, why not go try my hand at IndyCar or NASCAR? Different motorsport series. Something which he can try his hand at. Something a little bit different. And, yeah, why not? Give it a go. And also, something which will help his motorsport ability, which seems to have declined with the greatest disrespect to American Motorsport Series. Something which can help him get his mojo for racing back. So I think it wouldn't be a bad shout for him to spend some time on the American motorsport scene.
Now, if you were Ricciardo and the talks continue between yourselves and Mercedes and Red Bull, which one would you choose? Because we've got Nick de Vries, who's the current reserve driver of Mercedes, leaving for AlphaTauri. There's currently Liam Lawson, I believe, at Red Bull, but it seems that he's surplus to requirements. Would you go back to your former employer, cap in hand, saying, "I'm so sorry for doubting your ability, take me back"? Or would you go to Mercedes and go, they're a pretty slick winning machine aside from this year? What would you do?
Well, what would you do, Tom? Because I feel like we've fed into it quite a lot. What would you do if you're Daniel Ricciardo at this moment, as you're perhaps strung out a little bit?
I would go to Mercedes, because I think in terms of a pride element, in terms of that sort of thing, it'd be very, very difficult to go back to Red Bull and say, "Hey, I left you guys for Renault and a decent pay packet, because I felt, for want of a better phrase, you were holding me back, because looking back at the sort of Drive to Survive narrative they were trying to paint, and I don't think Ricciardo's words himself, tore away from that too much. It seemed that he was quite frustrated, restless at Red Bull, wanting a different challenge, and felt that the reliability issues from Renault were holding him back. And I think to this day he still failed to see the larger picture of it was the Renault engine that was holding Red Bull back. Therefore, him going to Renault didn't really make a lot of sense. If he'd have stuck with Red Bull, then who knows where he'd be now. I think he wouldn't be the number one driver, sure, but he'd be in a much better car than he currently is now, having a much better time, because, let's be fair, he had a great time at Red Bull, did so well with them, even in their sort of dark years, I guess, and even challenged them, even got Red Bull to challenge against Mercedes, should I say. So going to Mercedes, not going back to Red Bull, should I say, would be, I think, preferable, because it seems to me that this is a blip for Mercedes. They, by their own admission, designed a rather poor car which didn't really suit the new regulations, but now they've learned from that. We're now seeing Mercedes coming back into the fold. The last race, for example, they qualified in P2 in 3, and they've obviously got the qualifying pace, if not the race pace, but they're definitely moving up the grid and can beat Ferrari now on their day. And to work with someone like Toto Wolff, Lewis Hamilton, a rising star of George Russell, for example, a well-oiled Mercedes team which is, without controversy, a dominant force in Formula 1, I think that's probably his best scenario. I mean, the fact that you've got both of those sort of behemoths of Formula 1 asking for his signature, indeed seriously talking to him about that, is an accolade to him and something he should try and grab up as quickly as possible, because trust me, if he doesn't do it now, doesn't take up either of those offers, then ultimately they're going to fall by the wayside and never come back. So if I was him, definitely Mercedes, because I think that is going to be the force in the ascendancy come next year. But Red Bull aren't going anywhere, put it that way. And now we move on to the other business outside of the Mexican Grand Prix. The second driver of Haas. The rumours continue to swirl around that seat. The latest is that the US constructor will announce their 2023 driver lineup this week. A reminder, we're recording this on Tuesday, so if you're listening to this on Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and it's been announced, we don't know, but you do, so congratulations if that announcement has come out. And it seems it is a pretty straight decision, a straight fight between the incumbent Mick Schumacher and the former Aston Martin reserve driver, now a freelance driver if you will, fans' favourite Nico Hulkenberg. So what are our thoughts on that then? You either keep the young upcoming Schumacher Jr. or bring back someone from the cold who's now 35 years old but got a good record behind him.
I tell you now that if it's Nico Hulkenberg and Kevin Magnussen in Haas, they are going to have a punch-up. There's just no way around it. They hate each other. They just hate each other. I don't know why this is being considered. Well, I do know why it's being considered. Of course I do. That's a rhetorical question, dear listeners. But the fact is, it shouldn't be considered if the team wants a harmonious working relationship. Okay, right, yes. Well, maybe they'll settle things, and it's been a few years and all this sort of stuff. Yeah, it hasn't been long enough. Trust me. Go back and look it up. Find out what happened. With the infamous "you can kiss my lower necessities" line from Kevin Magnussen and Heaven and Nico Hulkenberg, threatening to lay his hand in an aggressive manner upon him, to strike him if you'd like. It's unfortunate what happened between them, and I just can't see them working together in Haas in any functional manner. And that's a real shame for Mick Schumacher, because I feel like if he is replaced, he's going to be replaced by somebody that didn't really set the world on fire when he was at Renault. Let's face it. Never forget the infamous Hockenheim race where Hulkenberg had the prime position in his Renault to bring it home on for third place, his first podium in F1. Then he binned it straight into the wall. And that's not the only time he's done that either. He's actually, he's had these problems where he's been unable to successfully bring home a sort of in the bag position, which is why he was inevitably dropped. And Renault and Cyril Abiteboul, who was at the time the team principal of Renault before they turned into Alpine, stated that they gave him many chances, and that was it. Hulkenberg had many chances, couldn't really bring it home, so they got someone else. And I feel like if he goes to Haas, the same thing's sort of going to happen to him. Except this time, it's going to be Kevin Magnussen and Nico Hulkenberg trying to outdo each other every single race. And where I think Kevin Magnussen has a respect for Schumacher and they sort of have little battles every so often, but in reality they get on, I could see Hulkenberg being like, right, I'm just going to sideswipe him. Who cares? Imagine like Lewis Hamilton, Nico Rosberg, but turned up a notch. To quote Spinal Tap, turned up to 11. I could see that happening, and I think it's going to be really unfortunate for Haas. And also, I hope Gene Haas, that is, got incredibly deep pockets, deeper than he has now, because if he keeps crashing, if they keep having problems, then they're going to exceed the cost cap. But maybe I'm wrong. What do you think? Do you think is it a good move? Does Hulkenberg deserve to still be in Formula One? Because I personally kind of counting him out.
I mean, call me boring, and call me putting a downer on things, but I think it's an uninspiring move. Personally, I think that there's better options out there. I don't know why they're going for Nico Hulkenberg, and I get actually no, it's a lie. I do know why. It's clear why. Because they want someone there with experience, and they want someone who can bring it home more. They've had an experience with Mick Schumacher, where they've managed to bring in someone who's raw, who's young, who they want for the future, but at the same time, he's someone who's had a lot of crashes, a lot of incidents, lots of prangs, and it's cost them money in the time when the cost cap is here. And they need to be able to save money. They've actually cost a lot of money by having him in the car. Not directly, but through him causing incidents and crashing. So it's a tricky one where they want to balance that with someone who won't be around only for a couple of years. But at the same time, I think that is Nico Hulkenberg. You forget life can pass really quickly sometimes as an adult. Such to the extent that Nico Hulkenberg is now 35 years old. Where on earth did that time go? But I think that's possibly the reason why he's not the right person, because he's older. He's had 3 years out of Formula One, so he's had a couple of sporadic appearances, like when he was substituted in for Stroll and Perez, and he's substituted in for Sebastian Vettel at Aston Martin this year. But he's had 3 years out of the sport. He's not exactly. He's a bit rusty, is he not? I think it's not the best time for him to come into the team and try and strut his stuff. I'd say that they should be going for someone with experience, but someone who has more time on their side. And I admit, at the moment, the Formula 1 grid seems to be made up of either lots of young up-and-coming drivers or lots of older drivers. There's not many in the 27 to 28, 29 bracket. Oh wait, there was Nick de Vries. Hang on. What about him? Why didn't they go for him? Thinking about it, that'd be one person who'd have been perfect. Young-ish, but got experience, time to develop, about the same age, because Kevin Magnussen now, being 28 years old, as I believe he is, 28, 29, bit more experienced, had been in Formula 1 a few years, 30 in fact, but still, not like 35 like Hulkenberg is. So it's an interesting decision, but it also makes me question Haas's strategy. Why bring in 2 young drivers at the start of 2021 who'd been in F2 to say we're developing them for the future with an eye on 2022 and beyond for a car and for a set of drivers who will develop with us? And then 2 years later, one, admittedly, Mazepin couldn't control the tragic, unforeseen circumstances in Ukraine, what's going on there. But then the other driver who was employed with an eye on the future is now being jettisoned before the future can even begin, quite possibly. I say that sounding with certainty because it does look like Schumacher will be put on the sidelines and Hulkenberg will get the seat. But it does make you question Haas's strategy. A bit of a strange one, I think. And it doesn't really stand out as a team who want to progress up the grid, because they're going to finish realistically either 8th or 9th this year after a bottom of the pile finish last year, and after a couple of 8th places before that. It's been a while since they had that brilliant season in 2018 where they started off with an absolute belter of a car and finished a very respectable, solid, comfortable 5th. And if they want to get back to those heights, you question why they'd be employing someone who's past their prime, carries experience, but is 35 and has had 3 years out of the sport. I'm not too sure about that one, to be honest, from them.
Yeah, I have to agree. If Hulkenberg is replacing Schumacher, he's a solid choice, he's a competent driver, but it screams of panic. It screams of we have to do something different because what's going on isn't working. Because you see Nick de Vries, for example, going off to AlphaTauri. You see Gasly going to Alpine. You see Alonso going to Aston Martin. Bottas at Alfa Romeo staying on there along with Guan Yu Zhou. And it's like Haas go, oh, blimey, well, we've got someone in, Magnussen, who's doing fine. We better go and do something different because everyone else is doing something different, so we'll do it as well. A kind of sort of domino effect of fear, I guess. And as you say, he lacks the wow factor, Hulkenberg. He's 35 years old. He's not got a podium. He's okay, but it's a very short-termism outlook, really. It's what Aston Martin are doing, I think, in terms of Alonso, but at least with Alonso, you know that he has won world championships, he's doing very well in Alpine, he's in the sport, but Hulkenberg is coming into it cold. Granted, he is a reserve driver with Aston Martin, he has raced in 2 races this season, but is he race ready as someone like Schumacher is? I don't think so. I think that they should keep on Mick Schumacher. I know there's been a few snide comments from Gene Haas about Mick Schumacher having potential but costing us a lot of money, and you can't really argue against that, but he is 23 years old, he has shown potential, and the question is who else is out there for them to go and get, who's the ripe old age or someone who they can sort of nurture in. It seems that Giovinazzi's off the table, that Ferrari wants to go and keep him as their reserve driver. You're then looking at someone like Ricciardo, for example, who, realistically speaking, comes with a lot of baggage in terms of a poor record more recently, as we touched upon there. And then, I mean, who else is there aside from going down to the Formula 2s? And we'll get on to one Formula 2 driver who may be joining Formula 1, but there's no oven-ready, if you will, options out there aside from sticking with what you've had. And I think that sticking with Schumacher is the best option because, yes, he has made mistakes, but he's also shown potential as well in my eyes. So it would be a sad moment for Formula 1 if Hulkenberg comes back, and that's no disrespect to him, it's just the fact that they're bringing somebody back because of what they've done in the past, not what they can do or have done more recently. And yes, there's no doubt that the combination of him and Magnussen will be full of friction, but I'm sure that they're willing to bury the hatchet in some form or another. They were seen sort of shaking hands and congratulating one another, or should I say Hulkenberg congratulating Magnussen post his fantastic points finish there in Bahrain. But how long will that last moving forwards if things get a bit tetchy and Haas are once again fighting in the sort of lower echelons of the points, if at all? So yeah, I do hope that Schumacher carries on because I think he deserves another year. After that, let's say if he repeats the season next season, then fair enough, you can go and say, well, we've given you a chance, that's 3 seasons now and you're not producing the goods, but doing it now in my mind would be a bad decision. So, and also as well, I don't really see the pull of Hulkenberg from a commercial point of view. We know that Schumacher brings in a lot of money owing to his name and owing to the sort of wealth that's behind him as well. Hulkenberg, in my mind, doesn't really do that, so I don't see the appeal of why he's doing that for on-track or off-track reasons. So, pray the rumours of Hulkenberg coming back as a non-reserve driver in Haas aren't true with respect to him.
If I may read you, actually, a quote from said Kevin Magnussen, because I think it's quite interesting, because he was asked about, let's say, their disagreements, and he says, I think I've said many times now that I don't have a problem with Nico at all. Actually, I respect him as a racing driver. I don't really know him as a person, but certainly as a racing driver, I've always respected him, and so I would have no problem. But I don't have an opinion on whether or not he should be in the second car. Mick is doing a great job at the moment. He's had some issues at the beginning of the year and a few crashes, but he's certainly faster now. Do you think that's true? Very quickly, do you think it's true that he respects him? Or do you think he's just saying this stuff to give the illusion, maybe, that it's going to be harmonious? From your experience,
I think think he could respect him, but I don't think he wants to respect him, put it that way. I think he wants Schumacher to stay in, quite obviously, but it's one of those where he goes, well, if I have to go and have Hulkenberg, then we could make it work, but it's not for me, ideally, Mr. Steiner and Haas.
I think it's one where, yeah, he probably wants Schumacher to stay, because really there isn't a de facto 1 and 2 at Haas, but Magnussen is now, this is his 5th year with the team. So he spent 4 years up to 2020 before he was then replaced. Him and Grosjean were replaced, and then he came back in this year. So he's effectively going into year 6 with this team. Probably feels pretty comfortable. Sees himself as a team leader, and he probably would want that status, or would feel that status would be better preserved should Schumacher stay. Whether he sees Hulkenberg as a threat, who knows? We aren't inside his mind, so we can't fully say. We'd be speculating, but I still think, yeah, it'd be interesting to see the dynamics between those two next year. Not that they're fighting for a world championship. I mean, I'd be surprised if the dynamics ruin the battle for 8th against AlphaTauri and Williams. But at the same time, it will be interesting to see how they get on and whether they can help drive the team forward. Like, I'm sure that at the end of the day, even if there is some background between different people in that team, between those two, they all should have one goal in mind, which is to get Haas up the grid as quickly as possible.
What I'd say, though, and this is my major concern, is, yeah, he might respect him, but if you are right, Angus, and Magnussen or Hulkenberg starts to see each other as a threat, then that is incredibly caustic. And you cannot have a congenial relationship between drivers when there is a tensious atmosphere derived from such a raw and powerful emotion as feeling like your job or your reputation is being threatened. And I think that's why Magnussen, like Schumacher perhaps, he hasn't necessarily feel threatened. But I fear that, yes, he might respect him, but respect is one thing. What are you willing to do to save yourself in F1? And if Hulkenberg has only just got back into the sport, I would say that he would be pretty ready to do anything to defend his position. And we know how badly that sort of envy between drivers in the same team, how that can cause huge issues. And I have to just raise, Lewis Hamilton and Nico Rosberg. They were friends before. They were good colleagues, and then there was sort of that threat for Hamilton that Nico could win the World Championship, and also, the threat that Lewis Hamilton could win and take it away from Nico. And then began the great fight that culminated with each other, looks like a Barcelona when they took each other out and things like that. And even to this day, you can tell that relationship's never repaired. And what I'm saying is they're starting off with a relationship that's already damaged. So I think it's a bold move, shall we say, for Gene Haas to employ Kevin Magnussen and Nico Hulkenberg. And I just wonder whether or not you're right that it is maybe from a team that's desperate to do something. And I just think that, when we spoke about Schumacher at the beginning of the season, we said he'd take some 2 years. Well, he's in a brand new car. I wonder if they're just kicking him out slightly too early and they do need him next year, because he's only just getting up to pace, for goodness sake. And even Magnussen said it. He said, he's up to pace now. Well, if that's true, then surely the right move is to continue the momentum rather than to cut it short and give someone else a go.
And it seems that's all we got time for in terms of episode 37 of F1 in Review. Thank you very much for listening all the way to the end of this one, be that on your preferred podcast provider or via River Radio, be that live or via the Listen Back feature. A reminder that you can follow myself, Tristan, and the F1 in Review account on Twitter, that is F1 in Review, no dots, no dashes, no nothing. If you want to go and search it up there and see the episodes of past and the episodes of present, and to also follow the episodes that are to come. And as we mentioned there at the start, the Brazilian Grand Prix is up next. Qualifying is on Friday. That's Friday 7 PM. That's if you're watching or listening in the UK. We've then got the final sprint race of the year on Saturday at 7:30 PM. Once again, that's British time. And then the race on Sunday at 6 PM. Once again, British time there as well. No doubt, looking at Brazilian Grand Prix gone by, there's been some rather interesting and tasty action there, and hopefully that will repeat itself for this one. And we look forward to discussing that next week when we speak to you this time next week, be that via River Radio or via your podcast provider. Thank you very much for listening, and we'll see you next time.